Think you were touching on earlier about some of the support the state has provided to some of these vulnerable populations. Can you break down what we saw coming from the state before the pandemic? Maybe some new relief or aid that's come along during the pandemic, and just for the benefit of our national listeners, I'm wondering, is there any federal overlap there?
Yes, there's absolutely federal overlap. So when the pandemic first struck, the state started to quickly take some actions even before the federal government took some of their largest actions in response to the pandemic. So expanded unemployment compensation, making sure that more people were eligible for unemployment, and making sure that people were eligible for unemployment even if they weren't able to, sort of find work again or they weren't looking for work at that time. So essentially providing income support. That is something that the step the state took early on, as well as a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures, making sure that people are able to stay in their homes and have that stability. So both income stability and stability in terms of being displaced during a pandemic is being displaced is never a good thing, especially not a good thing during a pandemic. Um, but the federal government's assistance to the states, particularly through the CARES Act coronavirus relief funds, those were really instrumental in permitting the state to really expand a lot of its supports, both to healthcare institutions, to individuals who needed assistance paying for housing, and to businesses. There were quite a few supports provided to businesses in particular, with some targeting towards smaller businesses. So, and there was also assistance to food banks, assistance to nonprofits. So there were quite a few supports that the state was able to implement with largely funded by the federal dollars that came in. The state revenue side dropped quite a bit, so there weren't as many state dollars available to fund some of the usual state supports. But because any COVID-19 related expenditures could be covered by those federal coronavirus relief funds, the state was able to implement and support quite a few programs that were targeted at sort of keep bolstering the economy or keeping people running through, keeping people supported through the worst period of the pandemic.
If you were to put on your advocacy hat in a way, or at least your policy advocacy hat, when you're looking at the state's needs right now, those vulnerable populations, and you look at the potential for additional relief, whether it's from the state or in part from the federal government, are there areas of need that are just abundantly clear to you that we really need to be funneling additional revenue into this because of this particular vulnerable population or this particular aspect of our economy?
Right. So, given that there's limited resources and we have to deploy them in certain places, I would say that one of the first areas you'd look at is protecting older adults, especially older adults in nursing homes and congregate living facilities. We've seen the health impacts be pretty severe in those situations. So, thinking about that in the context of funding health services, that's a critical area, especially again older adults, folks with disabilities, people who need services that often require in-person interaction. There's increased risk there, and having more protections and resources available in that sector in particular is important. Second, and this is both protecting health and protecting the economy and protecting people's ability to make ends meet. Aid to individuals who are either have lost their job or are low income individuals or both. That aid is critical for their ability not just to sort of pay bills in the short term, but also to support the economy in the long term, because those dollars are then generally put back into the economy in a relatively direct manner. Um, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the SNAP program I mentioned earlier, which is known as the Food Stamp Program here in New Hampshire, that has been shown based on prior studies. There was a studies from Moody's Analytics, for example. There's also studies from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which administers the program. That's been shown to have a positive return on investment, if you will, when it comes to economic support. For every dollar invested in the federal SNAP benefits in 2009, during the last recession, during the beginning of the recovery and the end of the last recession, the beginning of the recovery from, I should say, the last recession, the Moody's Analytics identified that for every dollar invested in the program, there was $1.74 of economic activity that was generated. So that was of the programs it looked at, of the policy options Moody's Analytics looked at, that was the highest return on investment. Also, unemployment compensation ranks highly in both that examination and some other analyses, including from the Congressional Budget Office. So those are areas where providing those resources to people, to low income folks, to folks with really limited resources or fewer resources than they had before, that's both helping them directly, meeting their bills each month, and providing economic stimulus. That's especially important for families that are low income families with children, because having children in the picture means there may be childcare costs or childcare duties, and also education duties that didn't previously exist, that may make it more difficult for those families to be able to engage in work and to be able to provide the support that they need to for both their kids and the financial support for the household.